Making your point so succinctly. OK, let's get an update on what's happening on the French coast now. The situation in the French port town of Calais has intensified over the last few days, as we've been reporting, with migrants saying it's England or death for them in some cases. According to the British media, there are even calls to send in the army to quell the chaos in Calais. MEP James Carver from the UK Independence Party told me how he saw the military being used.
It's drastic in how the army are used. I mean, what we're proposing is that the army are used in UK, not sending them into Calais, but sending them into UK to assist with regards to searching vehicles, searching lorries, searching trains, and actually, you know, we've got this huge problem with the numbers coming in, 130 people yesterday. What we need is member states taking control of the situation there rather than pushing it further west.
RT's Laura Burden-Manley went to one area where migrants have attempted to break through.
We've met dozens of migrants so far. They all seem to be going in the same direction. Just behind me, I think they're going to find a place along the wall in order to get through to the trains. Razor-sharp barbed wire coming all the way along these fences. These are double barbed wire, so there's absolutely no way of them getting across. But it seems as though some people with wire cutters have managed to cut a hole. In fact, I can see where one has already been repaired. There, it says danger of death. We need to be very careful. This is all electric fencing. Hi.
Hello.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
I believe this is the train that the migrants were attempting to catch, and they've just been prevented from doing so from the police. So this would be really disappointing for some of them.
While the situation in Calais reaches crisis point, the blame game's on too.
All the French authorities need to do at Calais is to grant asylum status to all 5,000 people there, give them French passports, and then they can come to the United Kingdom without having to climb onto the back of a truck.
We can see the hypocrisy of Great Britain and Mr Cameron himself.
Eurotunnel has a role to play here in the measures that they themselves put in place to protect their trains.
We saw a representative from Calais there. Of course, the growing number of migrants in that port town is placing a huge strain on the community. We'll keep across the story. We're across this too. Right-wingers in Sweden have held a gay pride in Stockholm's Muslim neighbourhoods. Later in the programme, we report on that event. It's been branded provocative because of its location. Sure, you've got your thoughts on it. We're covering it shortly. Next, though, Russia has vetoed a UN resolution to create a tribunal over the downing of flight MH17 last year in East Ukraine. Here's how Russia's ambassador to the UN defended Moscow's position.
It was prepared behind the scenes, outside the UN Security Council, and without careful consideration of the various options for a criminal investigation. My experience with tribunals on the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda cannot be called positive. They were lengthy, expensive, and subject to political pressure. It is difficult to explain how the events which a year ago were not deemed a threat to international peace and security have now, all of a sudden, become just that.
The proposed resolution included the appointment of a prosecutor with free access to information held by NGOs and governments. As for the ongoing MH17 probes, their findings should, quote, be taken into account. Fine wording, though. We're going to cover that again shortly with some live comment coming up. Right now, just to recap, of course, there are two official investigations into the crash. One of them is technical, the other is criminal. The cause of the tragedy is being looked into by the Dutch Safety Board. It's due to release its final report later this year in October, while at the same time a joint investigation team's looking into who is responsible excuse me, for the tragedy. Now, that probe won't be out until early next year, earliest. The team explained to us which scenarios concerning the tragedy are actually being considered here.
We are investigating several scenarios. First of all, which is well known all over the world, is the scenario in which the flight MH17 was shot down by a Buk missile that was launched somewhere from the eastern Ukraine. And the second scenario, we are investigating the scenario in which a jet fighter with an air-to-air missile shot down flight MH17.
Well, let's pick apart a little more what was proposed. The ongoing criminal investigation into the crash is among the reasons that Russia vetoed the Malaysian proposal. With us on the line now is security analyst and former UK counter-terrorism detective Charles Shoebridge to give us a few of his thoughts. Hi there, Charles. This resolution called, didn't it, for the earliest possible finalisation of the criminal probe into NH17. It brings the thought into your heads, you know, would that have put undue pressure on the joint investigation team, pushing it to come up with a conclusion so quickly?
Yes, I think undoubtedly the wording that you've cited would be interpreted within the team and within the countries concerned that there is criticism of the investigation team for not having produced its conclusions so far. And of course, as we've seen really over the last few months in particular, there's, if you like, a drip-drip effect as more evidence becomes available, certainly publicly, and in many cases more evidence is becoming available to the investigation as time goes on to challenge perceived theories from all the different parties concerned. And so therefore, of course, the investigation presumably is acting with due diligence. It doesn't want to be rushed into finding its conclusions only for more evidence to emerge later that may have to contradict those conclusions. And so therefore one imagines that if there is any concern that the investigation isn't proceeding diligently and efficiently, that there are better ways rather than publicly criticising it in this way than to exert pressure on it. But certainly nobody wants a rushed solution, a rushed conclusion that then turns out to be defective and can be challenged further down the line. Yeah,
Russia had a lot of concerns about this proposed tribunal. It was vetoed in the end, but that tribunal was wanted to be set up before the official joint investigation team probe was complete. Why, again, the rush? Before the results of the probe are out, they were talking about a tribunal.
Yes, exactly. And Russia has pointed out similarly that there's very little precedent, if any, for such a prosecution being mandated in this way by the tribunal set up by the UN Security Council. And indeed, it's arguable, I think, that Russia, to some degree, has done the other UN Security Council members a favour in this, because, of course, if it's set up a precedent this way, why not also have a similar tribunal established for similar incidents in the past? For example, the shooting down of the Iran airline that killed nearly 300 people by the US in 1988. And indeed, of course, in 2001, Ukraine itself shot down by accident a Russian airliner. Additionally, of course, there are many other ways that accidents happen in war. Many civilians are killed by, for example, Saudi Arabian, Israeli, US bombs, UK bombs. This would open the door to investigation and a tribunal and a prosecution of all these incidents. And so one really has the idea that this proposal, this resolution was put forward, of course, knowing, as indeed Russia signalled very clearly beforehand, Russia signalled that it would not allow this proposal to go through because it's premature, because there's still investigation taking place. And one wonders, therefore, if it was pushed through by other powers with the aim of embarrassing Russia.
We were talking about the fine print of it. You know, we're only aware of it now in the last day today, and the resolution said the tribunal would, quote, this may puzzle you, take into account the findings of the official probe, but not be based on it. What's the significance of that fine print there?
Well, it means that they don't need to be bound by what the tribunal, or what the investigations would find. And as you correctly say, there are two investigations into this, and one would think that by the time they report that this would have been looked into extremely thoroughly, and it therefore begs the question, why on earth would a future tribunal not bind itself by the results of that investigation? And I think, again, this may have been a favour that Russia has in this respect perhaps unwittingly bestowed on others, because if this resolution had been passed and a tribunal was set up and a future prosecution, it would have caused immense difficulties in the future, undermining not only that prosecution but also the investigations that are taking place at the moment, if they were to come to different conclusions. And of course the wording you've just cited leaves that open as a possibility. It would completely undermine the investigations that are currently being taken. And again, one wonders what the purpose really is of putting such difficult to implement wording into a resolution, a draft resolution, if not to almost ask for it to be vetoed, as indeed Russia has done.
Yeah, well, talking of which, of course, Russia made it very clear all the way along the line that it would veto that resolution, yet it was taken to a pointless vote, end of the day. It was never going to get anywhere because it was always going to be vetoed. So why did they go to the wire with the vote? Again, political.
Well, certainly it's open to the suggestion of that. And of course, if so, then knowing that Russia would veto this, rather than continue with more negotiations, and of course Russia made it clear it would veto it for the purpose of not having it to go to a vote, so that, in other words, perhaps a more balanced and a more shall we say, more compromise agreement could have been reached, because bear in mind some of this resolution is indeed what Russia has asked for. For example, it's asking for more transparency. It's also asking for the resolution as drafted. It did ask for that all parties involved in the MH17 disaster investigation should make public all the information they have. And of course, much of that information is being withheld by not necessarily the Russian side, but the other sides. For example, US hasn't released satellite data, Ukraine hasn't released its air traffic control tapes, and so on. And so some of this resolution would have been what Russia is asking anyway. But of course, the actual tribunal issue was a red line, and the other powers knew that. And of course, that therefore begs the question whether this proposal, this draft resolution, was put forward as part of a long tradition that we've seen, for example, over Syria, where it's known that a resolution is going to be unworkable. It's known that Russia and perhaps China will oppose that resolution, and it's put forward nevertheless in order to then attempt to play Russia and China in some cases as the bad guy in the media. And of course, in the West media, that's what's happened. What also happens, I would add, is that of course America, or rather others, also play this game, if that's what it is, a political game, playing on the tragedy of, for example, MH17. Of course, it's often the case that Israel is criticised in draft resolutions, and the US then vetoes those resolutions, notwithstanding how valuable they may be. And of course, those vetoes receive considerably less coverage in the West media.
Indeed. Security analyst and former UK counter-terrorism detective Charles Shoebridge, thank you for being on the programme. Well, for other theories as to what happened to MH17, plus the latest developments into the probe as the news comes through, we'll bring it to you and keep you up to speed on our site. And staying in East Ukraine too, the shaky truce there has been violated again overnight. 2 people died in shelling in a rebel-held area. We've got more on that and a lot more of the day's news too after the break.